Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a brand new show of Restoration Talks. We are going to discuss our brand new theme for this month. Last week, we started with our first episode looking at the Black history of diverse places, and we started with Europe. So today, we're also going to discuss that topic. I'm not going to do it by myself, I have my brothers with me. Welcome, Brother Harike. Welcome, Brother Samuel. How are you guys doing?
Doing fine, and you?
You guys are doing fine. Great. Yes, I'm doing fine as well. There's a lot to cover, so let's dive in. For everyone that wants to participate, you are free to comment in the comment section. Let us know what you think, what your thoughts were when you rewatch the show or watch the show again for yourself, because the comment section was on fire, to be said. A lot of comments were made. A lot of people disagreed with the information that we were spreading. So, even before we really go into the message, what were your guys' reaction to the comment section of the show itself? We talked about blackness in Europe, and and then it exploded.
Yeah, it depends on what you call a lot. There were a few people who saw things from a different perspective. To me personally, like scrutiny or someone having another opinion is never wrong because it's really difficult to have a complete picture of history. You'll always have your information, and
Hmm.
someone will have other information which might not entirely disagree, but if you mix them both together, you just have a broader picture.
Hmm.
But yeah, I know it was good to see interaction in the comment section, and the fun thing was some people disagreed, but they stayed until the end. They watched the complete show, so it's fine,
Hmm.
if they come next week and they also disagree with a few other stuff and they have additional information, it's also fine.
Hmm.
As long as they keep watching until the end, hey,
Yeah,
you might even learn from those comments, right?
exactly. Because there were a lot of people that were also sharing information which was not entirely incorrect, but then at the end, especially when the conclusion should be so the people in Europe were black. That's where they straight away from the correct answer. But this was the first time for me as well that I saw that the comment section was so lively as it was. And Samo, how was that for you?
No, I didn't really read through the comments.
You didn't really read through the comment, but
No.
you were there. You were alive, right?
Yeah, but there was too much going on, so at that moment I didn't really read it. Only the last few comments, and I just laughed,
Hmm.
but I didn't really read it in depth.
Yeah. Okay. And afterwards, because afterwards there were still a few comments left underneath the video. I guess
Who knows?
I think
Let's see.
I guess if some of them were because the minister was just quite relaxed in how he responded to the comments. I think that's the reason why some of them stayed as well, because you could also argue with them,
Mhm.
but he didn't do so. So I think that's the correct way to handle such type of situations. But moving on to the topic, blackness in Europe. This might sound like a um, thing never heard of. I think people do believe that there were black people in Europe, but not necessarily that they were part of the ruling class, part of royalty. So, how was it for you to have heard this information? What did it do to you?
Mm, I'll start.
Mhm.
Yeah, I heard this information even before the last show. I think we also discussed it. Was it online? I'm not sure if we discussed it online, but we already did a large teaching, an extensive teaching on the black nobility in Europe,
Mhm.
and it was, in a sense, a lot of things were new at that time. And yesterday, I also heard a few new things, but it is refreshing, because it broadens the scope of what your people have accomplished in the world,
Mhm.
right? It's really important to have. to have information like this because it makes you realize that your people, and yeah, the term black is really a term that doesn't specify which people, but I'm just using it in the sense of the
Mhm.
teaching. It makes you realize that you have done more than you've ever been told, right? So it's good for your psychology, it's good for your psyche, it's good for how you view yourself
Mhm.
and stuff like that. So yeah, I was happy with the information thus far.
Yeah, yeah. I do agree that it does something to how you might perceive yourself, especially when you're living in Europe. Because I think the narrative mostly is that, yeah, we didn't contribute nothing at all to this world, right? Or we were the wild people, we were the savages. But we built entire civilizations. We built what you can nowadays still see in Europe. I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, when I was on a boat trip. I was looking at the buildings, those old buildings in Amsterdam, and then you could see those moorkoppen, uh,
Hmm.
the faces and still the statues of the Moors on the buildings, and people will not realize or stand still, but these are elements of what was happening also in the Netherlands. So I guess it does create this sense of pride. I think that's something that we should all get from things like Black History Month. It contributes to our identity. It gives us I wouldn't say a better feeling about ourselves, but um, it challenges the narrative that we didn't do anything at all. So that's what it did for me personally. And for you, Samuel?
Yeah, for me, that's also quite interesting
Hmm.
because usually when the Europeans in history talk about the Middle Ages, for example,
Hmm.
they usually always talk about the Black Death, and they just leave it at that. And it's like there were only knights and I think farmers or whatever, but that's the only thing that was happening. Even though it was quite a lot of years, I think when you cover the Middle Ages in high school, it's like a period of 500 years or something,
Hmm.
and they act like nothing happened during that time. And
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
after it, in 100 years, they have like 30 more chapters when the Middle Ages was like 5 chapters, for example.
Hmm.
So when we got the information that during the Middle Ages there was actually quite a lot happening, but it wasn't influenced by the white people or so-called the Europeans at that time, but by the Moorish people and just people of color.
Hmm.
It made sense why they left that part out of history because it wouldn't look that great on them, and then a lot of the glory that they usually take on themselves
Hmm.
would have to be shifted towards people of color, and then it won't make sense how they enslave people for quite a significant period of time,
Hmm.
and they can't fit the narrative that black people weren't doing anything before slavery. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's also quite interesting, but it
Hmm.
also for me, it made sense why they would hide that part of history, but it was also interesting to find out why they did it.
Hmm. Yeah, the part about slavery, I remember in school also, every time we discussed slavery, I remember there was a specific chapter that really referenced that a lot of slaves came from Ghana, and and
And they
all
look at you, Ghanaian sister, they look at you.
and
Hmm.
all children would look at me like, "Oh, whoa, those are your people," and I didn't know what to say, because I didn't have that much knowledge either. And it's really weird because yeah, at that time, maybe it was because of my age. I never questioned it as well. I'm not sure. Did you
Yeah.
guys question your own history or not? You just took on the narrative that was already existing. So all of us thought.
Yeah,
And you
it's
know what it
really
is? Usually,
difficult.
black people don't even really talk about history. So
True.
when you're in school, we also usually a lot of the time we also don't care about their history. So when we're going through history, it's like okay, whatever, until
Mhm.
it gets to the part of slavery. So I think unconsciously I also just how do I say it? Only got a connection with slavery. Like okay, this is where our history starts. But before that, it is just the European history. I don't know how to explain it, but that's that's a feeling I had.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. And it's in general, it's really difficult to question authority. That's not only for black people, but in general, when you have an authority figure like a teacher in class, like a doctor wherever you go, it's really difficult to not believe what they say, even pastors in church in general. And it really forms your beliefs, your referentiecade. I don't know how to say that in English.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't question history at all, but that's why it is important to handle such topics. And that's why it's important to also make these topics part of religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when you only look at the world from a spiritual sense, when you are, let's say you are an African, you go to church, you only look at the world from a spiritual perspective, you lack understanding of everything that happened to your people. You It will be even difficult to understand the Bible in its entirety, because the Bible talks about history.
Mm-hmm.
When Abraham was walking the earth, when you read about Israel, when you read about Apostle Paul, you read about the Messiah, the world, in those days, something was also happening in the world. Black people were also in the world in Europe at those times,
Yeah.
right? The Israelites were also interacting with other black people in Europe, in Africa. So when you study history, it gives you a more complete image of the world at those times, and
Mm-hmm.
that will even help you in understanding the Bible and the scripture that you read. So yeah, it's good to study such topics.
Mm-hmm. And I do find it history can be such an important tool in educating and raising people or civilizations, or even like adding on to the knowledge of people. And that's why I find it so dangerous that history is mostly the narrative of well, whites or white people, um, and the fact that there has not, or maybe there has been some resistance towards that narrative, but it's not a lot. And I think that also has to do with what Samuel said. We don't necessarily really talk about history that much, or we do not really stand still. I think it's something of maybe these past years that we have been investigating more and more and more, not necessarily within the group, but also in media and everything. Because I remember the minister mentioning artistic license. Do you guys remember what that kind of
Yeah.
meant? What?
Yeah,
Hmm. What does it
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
It's a
What
little
what
bit
what
like,
exactly it means? I think it comes down to whitewashing. It comes down to changing the narrative for your interest.
Hmm.
And the point of some, that black people generally don't really watch history or are interested in history. Why would you be interested in history if the only thing about your history is that you were slaves, you were baboons, you were savages, right? If that is your history, I can understand why black people in general have a disconnect for history, because history never offers black people anything to be proud of.
Hmm.
So subconsciously, you will disconnect with history because there is nothing good for you in it,
Hmm.
right? And yeah, once again, that is why it's important to handle these topics,
Hmm.
show that there were a lot of black nobility in Europe in this case,
Hmm.
and tackle stuff like this.
And what would then be like a good first step? Because maybe the clip that maybe the show of last week was the first show that some people saw. For them, it still might be a story that's made up. It doesn't add up. Maybe we just took certain excerpts from certain books, certain images. Maybe it's a whole made up story. So, what would be an appropriate first step to, yeah, educate people in this
you
area?
mean to educate yourself or for us to educate other people?
Yeah, you can answer both. Yeah.
I can answer for yourself. Like the minister said multiple times during the show that you should not just take his word for it, but you can also further research the topics that he is handling. So there were some key points, also key words like, for example, a simple example is the Cheddarman. When
Mm-hmm.
you hear such a thing as it is new information, you could just type in Cheddarman
Mm-hmm.
and then look upon the results that you can find. And from there, even from just starting with such a word, you can find new things, and then you just keep on searching.
Mm,
until you get proof for yourself. That's usually what I do. And then I get a confirmation like, okay, he knows what he's talking about. So I
mm,
can just use the bullet points that he is referring to and use it as the base of your research because he has already done the foundation for you.
mhm. Okay.
That's
So researching, yeah, start your own research actually. Just
yeah, because with this particular topic, I don't think you can do anything else besides research.
mhm.
Yeah,
That's
history in a sense is research. So
Yeah.
it requires reading, studying, looking into stuff.
mhm,
But like to get to elaborate or to add to the point of the brother, for example, something like Cheddar Man.
mhm,
It is something that you can Google within 5 minutes, but it shows you that the original people of Europe were of black origin, were of Negro, if you can use the term Negro. In those days, they weren't using the term Negro; it was a relatively new term.
mhm.
But it shows the fact that the original people of Europe were black people. But why is that not something that is also being handled in school? Because Chanderman actually is not the only one, right?
That's
They also found skeletons of the Cro-Magnon man. That is also a person in Europe, which the white people themselves dig the bones and they did their research and they found out this is an African looking or an African person who is one of the aboriginals of Europe. And
mhm,
next to Cheddar Man and the Cro-Magnon man, I believe you also have the Grimaldi man is a third person, right? So all of these things are known. They know it.
mhm,
But they decide not to share it with black people to make them realize that they were the aboriginals, the original peoples of all the continents, including Europe. So
mhm,
yeah, it's important to study these things. And what I mentioned is just a Google search away.
mhm.
So that's why I'm mentioning it.
Yes, because I can share my screen. We discussed it on the show itself, and also within our own group. But for those who might have missed, let me know if you can see my screen, guys. Can you see the screen?
Uh, I see
Check.
something small beneath, but I'm not sure that's in the live, that it is in the live.
No, I don't. Yeah, now I see it.
Okay. So here, for example, shout out to realhistorywww.com has so much information on blackness not only in Europe but many parts of the world, and it actually goes back to how we were the original people of all regions. But there are so many things, and we just discussed artistic license. We talked about the whitewashing. What I found funny was this image of Queen Charlotte, but as now there is a TV show on Netflix, right, on Queen Charlotte, and they casted her as a black or mixed race woman, what she
Mhm.
also was. And I see that sometimes there is this attempt, but they still do not tell the entire story around it. So,
Mhm.
for example, here we see a white Queen Charlotte, but she is mixed race or was mixed race. And there are so many images, and I'm just scrolling through the images of people all over Europe, coming from maybe nobility. This is a Prince James III of England, for example, was also a mixed race person, but this is the image that we, for example, see maybe in the museums, maybe in media. And it's just for us, or for us to highlight that there's so many things, there's so many evidences of black royalty within Europe, but people still decide to believe what they want to believe. And I
And,
think,
and and one image, I forgot the image, but one image that really shows the situation of Europe in the 14th century AD. So in the current,
hmm
yeah, I can just yeah, in the 14th century is the image of the black nobility of Germany fighting against the wild men of the four. I forgot it. Let me Google it. Maybe you can pull that up.
that wow is something with tapestry, right?
Yes, exactly.
Uh,
That image is really something that black people, when you are talking about the history of Europe, you should really get that in your head. Tapestry, German. No, I'm not sure if I'll find it. I have it somewhere on my laptop, but
no worries. I'm trying to find it
against
as
wild men. Oh yeah, I think I have it,
you have it.
but I'm not sure how I can send it to you. And it's such a large image, so you'll need to scroll
Because
around.
I believe it was
Oh yeah.
also.
Wait, let me send it to you on WhatsApp. I'm not sure if you can get it on screen.
I think I have it here. Um,
It's German nobility against wild men. If you type tapestry German nobility against wild men,
yes, I got it because there was also something that I want to show from the show itself. Moment. Think you mean, yeah, you mean this, right?
yeah,
This image.
yeah. Can you pull it up?
Oh,
Because
yes.
this image really it's like a summary of European
Mhm.
history,
Yeah.
right? So if you look at the image, you see that the black people are in the castles. The black people are wearing the crowns.
Mm-hmm.
The black people are defending their homes. You see that the black people are clothed. They are the ruling class in Germany. This is in the Museum of Fine Arts, and it shows you that in this scenario that it was the white people or the Europeans or the invaders that were naked, that were not wearing clothes, that
Mm-hmm.
did not have weapons, that did not have houses. They were the savages, and
Mm-hmm.
they are attacking the black nobility in Germany at that time. So you see in the castle that the king and the queen are wearing the crowns. They are black people,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's not as if this history is not known. So they know the history. They have recorded the history. They have
Mm-hmm.
made images of the history. But when it comes to this time, this period in the Middle Ages, they won't tell you this. They will tell you that Karel de Grote invented school, for example. So they skip over all these things. But I really like this image because it really summarizes the history of Europe at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I think that's also Samuel mentioned the dark ages. It's like few pages, and then suddenly we're in the Renaissance, and everything is amazing, and it's culture is being found out again, and there's an appreciation for Roman culture, Greek culture, everything. But this was the time period in which all of this happened. This was the time period in which literally all of Black Europe was taken over by these wild men and savages. And of course, white people will not acknowledge the narrative that they were the barbarians, they were the ones that were uncivilized, and we taught them how to actually be civilized. Um, so I fully agree, as to something has to change. We probably have to take it step by step. Will we change the main narrative? Probably not, because this is unfortunately this is we live in their world, um, so to say. But I feel like the show that we had was a very good starting point for people, even for those that may not be acquainted to these topics or to, for example, the image that we just showed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that the show of last week,
Hmm.
because for example, the minister started with the topic of the Phoenicians,
Hmm.
and in general, the topic of the Phoenicians is quite a difficult topic to understand, especially when you're new to history. If you start with the Phoenicians, it's really because the term Phoenician is a difficult term. It refers to different people in history at the same time,
Yeah.
right? But he later on came a bit down. He made it a bit more simple when he was looking, for example, at the Moors, because the Moors is something which is really documented. Also, the tapestry that we showed is
Hmm.
really easy to find. You can kind of quickly understand what's going on when it comes to the Moors. So I was happy that he also took it that direction.
Hmm.
So if the part of the Phoenicians was a bit too difficult, if you fast forward, you'll get into more modern history when
Hmm.
he's talking about the Moors and the Grecians. and he also showed that the original Britons or the people of Brittany were also black.
Mhm.
Britain, but yeah, so that's good to have a look at that.
Yeah, I remember doing research to like what is the meaning of my own name because it only said from Britain, and I was like, okay, obviously. And then I looked at the etymology and from which people it came, and it probably referred to the people and the color that they were, and that's also something that yeah, actually found out about the Brits not very long ago. So there is evidence of a black history, nobility in Europe everywhere. Um, you just have to put in the effort to figure it out. So before we kind of round off, this question is to Samuel. If there's one thing that you want people to remember from the show, last week's show, what is really one key takeaway that you would want to give them?
I think that the Moors weren't a religion, but they were a group of people.
Hmm.
Because what the Europeans like to do with the Moors, because the Moors are a term that we have studied throughout history, and I mean in school.
Hmm.
But when we heard Moors, I always related it to the Muslims because that's what they told us.
Yeah.
But when you do that, you forget that the Moors were actually a group of people and not maybe not identified by the religion alone, but they were also a group of people of color.
Hmm.
So one of the most important things, especially to study European history,
Hmm.
is I think to remember that the Moors were people of color and to really start researching that for yourself so you
Hmm.
can also make more sense of things that happened during the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. And like
Hmm.
for example in Valencia, because that was also something that I studied in high school.
Hmm.
But when I think when Minister Chris also explained more about the history of Valencia, it made more sense because it was something that we covered in school, but they left out a lot of parts about it. So it didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And when he explained it like this, it was like, oh, okay. Now it's also understand the importance of the Moors
Hmm.
and who they were. And when you do that, you can relate it more to European history.
Yeah. Nice. Nice ones. And for you, Brother Enrique, what is one key takeaway that you want the people to remember?
That I want the people to remember. Then I'll go back to something that I said earlier. Like someone also already talked about the Moors. I think that is a really good starting point,
Mhm.
especially when you get into Black history in Europe. I would start with the Moors, but aside from that, I would also look at what we mentioned in the beginning of the show: Cheddar Man, Cro-Magnon Man, and Grimaldi Man. Those are things that you can just Google. That will be just a confirmation for yourself that the original people that white scientists themselves found in Europe are of a black origin.
Mhm.
And if you are able, if you were able to touch those two things, then one thing that I would add is when you look at European history in general,
Mhm.
you'll see that even in history books, even when you study history books, they always look towards the Greeks. Why the Europe always look towards the Greeks and say that the Greeks are the Greek civilization is the foundation of European civilization.
Mhm.
If you have time and you dig into that, you'll find that the Greeks actually learned a lot of what they know from the Phoenicians, from the Africans,
Yeah.
right? The famous people like Herodotus, the famous people like Herodotus, Tacitus of the Roman time. They are great generals and pillars of Greek civilization and Roman civilization, and
Mhm.
they tell you that they learned a lot from the Africans, right? So
Yeah.
if you combine those information about the Moors, about the Cro-Magnon man, the Grimaldi man, and then you look at the Greeks who are the foundation of Europe, and you learn that they learned actually from the black people,
Mhm.
that will give you a better sense of what was happening in Europe during different periods of history. And then
Mhm.
you can add to your information and add to your information. Then you get into the Brits, you get into the original Italians, but I think that it will be for a later stage, and you can just start in the sequence that I just mentioned.
Yeah.
when you are researching, yeah, Black history of Europe.
Yeah, very nice, good one. The only thing I would add is, yeah, it's a never-ending story. You'll continue to find out more and more and more, as you start with every separate country, for example, or maybe when you start what you just indicated with the Greeks. Um, you will find so much information, and I can imagine that it's overwhelming for someone that has never heard this, to immediately be confronted with such type of information. Take it one step at a time. Start somewhere. Add what you can add. And also, if you can't figure it out, also discuss these type of things with people that maybe even know more, because a lot of the sources that you will find, these are not Black people. The books and all the articles, these are not written by Black people. It's the own white people that have written all these stuff. So when researching, also stay open-minded and not be focused like, okay, this needs to be from this type of scholar or this type of researcher, because they know, they did a very very good job in hiding, but the information is also out there. So just take it one step at a time. That is what I would say. Let me check if there's someone in the
So
comments.
what I would like to add, this is not necessarily about Europe,
Yeah.
but but I want to drive or elaborate on the point that this part of history also makes you appreciate the Bible more.
Mm,
Because when you, for example, look at the Moors, you realize that many of the Moors were a mingled people with Hebrews, right? Many of the Moors were Israelites. That's what history says about them. They were Muslims. Many of the Moors were also Israelites, right?
mhm,
And if you then realize that, okay, the Moors are black, that also shows you, hey, then the Israelites who were with them, we also see in the picture, they are also black, right?
mhm,
That means that the people of the Bible, who the Bible calls Israelites, probably are also black.
mhm,
If you look, for example, at the Phoenicians, if you get to that point and you study the Phoenicians,
mhm.
you realize that they were black, but the Phoenicians actually spoke the same language as the original Hebrews. They have the same alphabet, right?
Yeah.
They were mingled and they were mixed with the Hebrew Israelites of the Old Testament. So if the Phoenicians are black, they speak the same language as the Hebrew Israelites. It means that the Hebrew Israelites looked like them. So when
Mhm,
you're talking about Abraham, when you're talking about Nimrod in the Bible, you are talking about the prophets in the Old Testament, they all looked similar to that.
mhm,
Even though it's not about Europe, it gives you a better understanding of how the world, including the people of the Bible, looked like in those periods, right?
mhm,
So that is just something that I wanted to chip in,
mhm.
for whoever will really follow the sequence of the studies that we mentioned.
Yeah, yeah, and that's also the intent of this entire series, right? We're talking about Black history and its global impact. So we have mentioned it many times. Also, the blackness in the scripture. So if you combine it with what you just said, I think it would make a lot of sense to even those that are who say that they are researchers of the scriptures. So a lot was discussed. We also showed a few things. You guys gave good nuggets. I hope it helps someone. Maybe one person, if it reaches one person, or sparks someone to do some research, that would already be great. For the people at home, you are always free to contact us through private messages, through the comments section. We do our best to respond to each and every person. Also, I see in our comment section, Sister Heli, thank you for tuning in, and for everyone at home. Make sure that you tune in tomorrow, 12 p.m. sharp, because we're going to another part of the world, because we're going to look at the Black history of the Arabs, something that has not been discussed a lot as well, but there are tons of researches concerning their blackness. So make sure that you tune in. Of course, do not forget to like, subscribe, share. We see a lot of people looking, we don't see a lot of people subscribing or liking, so make sure that you do that as well. And hopefully we see you next time. Next week, restoration talks will be in Dutch for our Dutch speakers and listeners. So everyone who's at home who's Dutch, make sure you tune in for Restoration Talks. Once again, thank you very much, Brother Harike. Thank you very much, Brother Samuel, and we wish you a happy Sabbath. Have a nice evening. Bye bye.